The silence in the grand ballroom was deafening. 600 pairs of eyes fixed on a single figure, seated at the magnificent Steinway grand piano, a 17-year-old black girl in a simple navy dress that had clearly seen better days. Her worn shoes barely touched the ornate pedals beneath her feet. This was Jasmine Brooks, and she was about to do something impossible. Behind her, standing with the other faculty members, Mrs. Constance Whitmore wore a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The head of Oak Ridge Preparatory Academy's music department had done everything in her power to prevent this moment. She'd mocked, sabotaged, and humiliated this scholarship student at every turn. Now she watched with barely concealed anticipation, waiting for the inevitable failure that would prove her right. The program listed Jasmine's piece, Beethoven's Piano Sonata, number 23, in F minor, opus 57. The Appassionata, one of the most technically demanding and emotionally complex works in the piano repertoire. A piece that professional pianists spent years mastering. A piece that Mrs. Whitmore had assigned specifically because she believed it would break this girl who didn't belong. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "That's the janitor's daughter," someone murmured. "What was the school thinking?" another voice questioned. "This should be interesting," a third person said, though their tone suggested they expected a disaster. Jasmine's hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. For just a moment, doubt flickered across her face. Then something changed. Her eyes closed. Her breathing steadied. And when her fingers finally touched the ivory keys, everything changed. But how did a janitor's daughter end up here, about to silence her biggest critic? How did a girl who couldn't afford her own piano become the most talked about performer at Oak Ridge Preparatory's most prestigious charity gala? And what would happen when those first notes rang out, to understand that we need to go back 3 months, to where this impossible story really began. 3 months earlier, autumn had painted Oak Ridge Preparatory Academy in shades of gold and crimson. The private school sat on 30 acres of manicured grounds in Connecticut, where the sons and daughters of CEOs, politicians, and old money families received what the brochure called an education befitting tomorrow's leaders. Tuition ran $60,000 a year. Most students drove cars worth more than some people's houses. Jasmine Brooks didn't drive at all. She took 2 buses to get to school each morning, leaving her small apartment in the city at 5:30 a.m. She was one of only 12 scholarship students in a class of 200 seniors, admitted through a diversity initiative that the school used in its promotional materials but rarely discussed otherwise. Her mother, Patricia Brooks, worked as a janitor at the very school her daughter attended. It was a detail that Jasmine's classmates never let her forget. But Jasmine had learned to move through Oak Ridge's halls with quiet dignity. She kept her head down, her grades up, and her dreams to herself. Those dreams were simple, really. Graduate. Get into a good college. Make her mother proud. And maybe, just maybe, honor the memory of her father. Sergeant Michael Brooks had died 5 years ago when Jasmine was 12. A veteran who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, he'd come home with wounds that weren't visible, but cut just as deep. PTSD had turned the strong, laughing man Jasmine remembered into someone quieter, more fragile. But he'd found solace in one thing: music. Michael had taught himself piano during his deployment, finding an old keyboard in a rec room on base. When he returned home, he'd saved for months to buy a second-hand upright piano. It was battered out of tune and missing 2 keys, But to Jasmine, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Her father had taught her to play on that piano. Every afternoon after school, they'd sit together on the worn bench, his larger hands guiding her smaller ones across the keys. Music doesn't care about your bank account, he'd tell her, his voice gentle. It doesn't care where you come from or what you look like. Music only cares if you can feel it here. He'd tap her chest right over her heart and share what you feel with the world. Jasmine had been playing since she was 4 years old. By the time she was 8, she could sight-read pieces that impressed her father's friends. By 10, she was playing Chopin and Debussy. By 12, she was working through Bach's more complex fugues. And then her father died suddenly, a heart attack in his sleep, and the music stopped. They'd had to sell the piano to pay for the funeral. Jasmine hadn't touched a keyboard for 6 months. When she finally did on a public piano in a shopping mall, she'd broken down crying in the middle of a Mozart sonata. But she'd also realized something: her father's words were true. The music was still inside her. It had always been there. And as long as she could feel it, as long as she could share it, a part of him was still alive. Now at 17, Jasmine hadn't lost her gift, but she'd had to practice in secret in stolen moments. Oak Ridge had beautiful music facilities, but scholarship students weren't encouraged to use them outside of required classes. Still, Jasmine would sneak into the practice rooms during lunch, during free periods whenever she could. She'd play on the school's pristine grand piano's instruments that cost more than her mother made in a year, and for those brief moments, she felt complete. Mrs. Constance Whitmore had been the head of Oak Ridge's music department for 22 years. At 61, she was a formidable figure, with silver hair always pulled into a severe bun, designer clothes that probably cost more than Patricia Brooks's monthly salary, and a voice that could freeze students in their tracks. She came from old money. Her family had been patrons of the Boston Symphony for 3 generations. She'd studied at prestigious conservatories in Europe and had performed in notable concert halls in her youth. She also had very specific ideas about who belonged in classical music. To Mrs. Whitmore, classical music was the domain of the cultured elite. It required not just talent, but breeding refinement, proper training from the finest instructors starting in early childhood, and most importantly, the right background. She'd made her views clear in countless subtle and not so subtle ways over the years. She favored students whose parents were donors. She gave solos to children whose last names appeared on buildings. She believed that music was a birthright of the privileged, not a passion for the poor. Jasmine Brooks represented everything Mrs. Whitmore disdained. The confrontation that would change everything began in mid-September during an assembly about Oak Ridge's annual Winter Charity Gala. The event was the school's premier fundraiser, a black tie affair that drew 600 of Connecticut's wealthiest residents. Each year, it featured performances by Oak Ridge students, always carefully selected, always impeccably presented, always designed to demonstrate the school's excellence. The headmaster announced that auditions would be held for student performers. Solo slots were available for instrumental performances. Any senior could audition. Jasmine felt something stir in her chest. A solo performance. On a real stage. In front of a real audience. It wasn't Carnegie Hall, but it was something. It was a chance to honor her father's memory, to prove that his lessons hadn't been wasted, to show that music truly didn't care about bank accounts. That afternoon, she approached Mrs. Whitmore's office. Mrs. Whitmore Jasmine stood in the doorway, nervous but determined. "I'd like to audition for the Winter Gala." Mrs. Whitmore looked up from her desk, and for a moment, something like surprise crossed her face. Then her expression hardened into what might have been called a smile, if it had contained any warmth whatsoever. "Miss Brooks." She said the name as if it tasted unpleasant. "How ambitious of you." "I'm a senior," Jasmine said, keeping her voice steady. "The announcement said any senior could audition." "It did say that, didn't it?" Mrs. Whitmore set down her pen with deliberate care. "Tell me, Miss Brooks, what would you plan to perform?" "I was thinking a Chopin nocturne, or perhaps the Winter Gala is our most prestigious event." Mrs. Whitmore interrupted her tone, arctic. "Our donors expect excellence. They expect to see students who represent Oak Ridge's finest, students who have trained with the best instructors, who have performed at respected venues, who come from—" She paused, her eyes traveling over Jasmine's worn uniform appropriate backgrounds. The implication was crystal clear. "You don't belong." But Jasmine had promised her father she'd never stop playing. "I believe I can meet those expectations, Mrs. Whitmore. My father taught me." "Your father," Mrs. Whitmore's eyebrows rose. "And what were his credentials? Juilliard, Curtis, Berkeley." "He was self-taught, but self-taught." Mrs. Whitmore repeated the words as if they confirmed everything she already believed. "Miss Brooks, classical piano requires years of rigorous training from qualified instructors. It requires exposure to proper technique, to the finest instruments, to the cultural context that gives the music meaning. It's not something one simply picks up from a parent with no formal training." Jasmine felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I'd still like to audition." Mrs. Whitmore studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "Very well. Auditions are Friday at 4 p.m. Don't be late." Jasmine left feeling both triumphant and uneasy. She'd gotten what she wanted, a chance. But something about Mrs. Whitmore's smile bothered her. It was the smile of someone who knew something you didn't. The smile of someone who'd already won. She'd understand why soon enough. Friday afternoon arrived with the weight of judgment. Jasmine waited outside the auditorium with 11 other students, all seniors who'd signed up to audition. She recognized most of them Madison Clark, whose father owned a hedge fund and who'd been playing violin since she was 3. Christopher Yang, a pianist whose family had donated a new wing to the music building. Sophia Castellano, whose mother was on the board of the New York Philharmonic. They all looked at Jasmine with barely concealed surprise. "You're auditioning?" Madison asked, not unkindly, but with genuine confusion. "For the gala, yes," Jasmine said simply. "What are you playing?" Christopher asked. "A Chopin nocturne, number 2, in E-flat major." Sophia made a face. "That's pretty basic, don't you think I'm doing the Brahms Second Rhapsody?" Jasmine didn't respond. She knew her piece wasn't the flashiest choice, but it was one her father had loved. One he'd hummed while cooking dinner, one that meant something to her beyond its technical difficulty. Mrs. Whitmore called them in one by one. Jasmine went last. By the time her turn came, her hands were clammy, and her heart was racing. She walked onto the auditorium stage, aware of Mrs. Whitmore sitting in the 3rd row with 2 other music faculty members. The piano on stage was magnificent, a gleaming Steinway concert grand that probably cost $100,000. "Whenever you're ready, Miss Brooks," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice echoing in the empty space. Jasmine sat at the bench, adjusted her position, and placed her hands on the keys. She took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The opening measures of the nocturne were gentle melancholy, like a quiet conversation in the evening. Jasmine let herself sink into the music, let it carry her away from the auditorium, from Mrs. Whitmore's judgmental gaze, from her own nervousness. Her fingers moved across the keys with a fluidity that came from thousands of hours of practice, from muscle memory built over 13 years, from pure love of the music. She played the way her father had taught her, not showing off, not rushing, but feeling every note, every phrase, every moment of the piece. The nocturne built to its passionate middle section, her right hand singing out the melody, while her left provided the rolling accompaniment. She navigated the technical challenges smoothly, the quick runs, the octave leaps, the delicate ornaments. And then she brought it back down, ending with the same gentle melancholy with which she'd begun. The final note faded into silence. Jasmine looked up at Mrs. Whitmore, hope fluttering in her chest. The music teacher's face was unreadable. She scribbled something on her notepad, then looked up. "Thank you, Miss Brooks. That will be all. We'll post results on Monday. That was it. No feedback, no comment, just dismissal." Jasmine left the auditorium with a sinking feeling in her stomach. Monday morning came too slowly and too quickly at once. Jasmine arrived at school to find a crowd gathered around the music department bulletin board. She pushed through her heart hammering and found the list of selected performers. Madison Clark, violin, Vivaldi. Four Seasons, Winter, Christopher Yang, piano, Chopin. Ballade. Number 1. Sofia Castellano, piano, Brahms. Rhapsody Number 2, Ethan Morrison, cello, Elgar Cello. Concerto. First movement. There were 8 names total. Jasmine's wasn't among them. She stood there staring at the list, feeling something crack inside her chest. She'd known it was a long shot. She'd known Mrs. Whitmore didn't like her. But some part of her had hoped, had believed that the music would speak for itself. That talent would matter more than background. Tough break, Brooks. Christopher Yang appeared beside her, not unkindly. "You actually played really well Friday. I heard you from the hallway." "Not well enough, apparently." Jasmine managed. "It's not about that," Christopher said quietly. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Everyone knows Mrs. Whitmore only picks students whose parents write big checks. It's political. Always has been." Before Jasmine could respond, a commotion drew their attention. Mrs. Whitmore had emerged from her office and was approaching the bulletin board. The crowd parted for her instinctively. "Miss Brooks," she said, her voice carrying across the hallway. "A word, please." Jasmine followed her into the office, dread pooling in her stomach. Mrs. Whitmore sat behind her desk and steepled her fingers. "I wanted to speak with you about your audition." "I understand I wasn't selected," Jasmine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "No, you were not. And I felt you deserved an explanation." Mrs. Whitmore paused, and that same unnerving smile appeared. "Your technique is adequate for someone with your background. But the Winter Gala requires more than adequacy. It requires artistry, sophistication, cultural understanding. These are qualities that come from years of proper training, from exposure to the finest music from an early age, from growing up in an environment that values and understands classical music." "Music doesn't care about environment," Jasmine said, her father's words coming to her lips before she could stop them. "It only cares if you can feel it and share it." Mrs. Whitmore's smile vanished. How naive. Music is culture, Miss Brooks, and culture is not democratically distributed. You can feel it all you want, but without the proper foundation, without the right training, without coming from a world that understands these traditions, you'll never be more than a competent amateur. The words stung more than Jasmine wanted to admit, but something in Mrs. Whitmore's tone, something almost defensive, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as Jasmine made Jasmine straighten her spine. "Is that all, Mrs. Whitmore?" "Actually, no." The smile returned. "I've been thinking. You seem quite determined, and I believe in giving students opportunities to grow even when they're overreaching. So I'm going to offer you something." Jasmine waited, suspicion prickling at the back of her neck. "One of our selected performers, Emily Bradshaw, has had to withdraw. Family emergency. That leaves us with an open slot." Mrs. Whitmore leaned back in her chair. "I'm willing to give you that slot, Miss Brooks. A solo piano performance at the Winter Gala." Jasmine's heart leaped, really. "On one condition." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes glinted. "You won't be performing your little Chopin nocturne. If you're going to represent Oak Ridge on our most important night, you need to prove you can handle something truly challenging. Something that will demonstrate whether you actually belong on that stage." She pulled a piece of sheet music from her desk drawer and slid it across to Jasmine. Jasmine picked it up, and her blood ran cold. Beethoven, Piano Sonata, number 23, in F minor, Opus 57, the Appassionata. "That's..." Jasmine started. "One of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire," Mrs. Whitmore finished. 30 to 35 minutes of technical and emotional complexity that separates true pianists from pretenders. If you can perform this, and I mean perform it, not just stumble through it, then perhaps I'll reconsider my assessment of your abilities." Jasmine stared at the music. The Appassionata was legendarily difficult. Even professional pianists approached it with respect and careful preparation. The first movement alone was a tempest of rapid passages, dramatic contrasts, and physical demands. The second movement required supreme control and emotional depth. The third movement was an explosive finale that pushed the limits of speed and endurance. It would take months to learn properly. The gala was in 3 months. Mrs. Whitmore was setting her up to fail, publicly, spectacularly, in front of 600 people. Jasmine looked up and met Mrs. Whitmore's eyes. The older woman was watching her with barely concealed anticipation, waiting for Jasmine to back down, to admit defeat, to know her place. And in that moment, Jasmine heard her father's voice as clearly as if he were standing beside her. "Promise me you'll never stop playing." "I accept," Jasmine said. Mrs. Whitmore's smile widened. "Wonderful. I'll add you to the program. The gala is December 15th. That gives you exactly 12 weeks. I do hope that's enough time." It was a dismissal, and Jasmine took it. She left the office clutching the sheet music, her hands trembling, her mind reeling. She'd just agreed to attempt the impossible. And Mrs. Whitmore was counting on her to fail. The first time Jasmine tried to play through the Appassionata, she lasted 3 pages before her fingers cramped and she had to stop. The piece was a monster. Every page presented new challenges, impossible stretches, lightning-fast passages, coordinations that required her hands to do completely different things at completely different speeds. And that was just the technical side. The emotional demands were just as brutal. This wasn't a pretty nocturne or a cheerful sonata. This was Beethoven at his most intense, channeling passion, fury, and desperation into music. It was also, Jasmine realized, as she struggled through it again, that first afternoon absolutely magnificent. The problem was that learning it properly required time she didn't have, and resources she couldn't access. She didn't have a piano at home. Her mother couldn't afford one, and their apartment was too small anyway. That meant she could only practice at school in the practice rooms tucked away in the music building's basement. But those rooms had limited hours. Students could sign up for 30-minute slots during free periods and lunch. Jasmine signed up for every available slot, but it wasn't enough. 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. It was impossible to build the stamina and continuity the Appassionata demanded. So she started sneaking in. The music building was supposed to be locked after 4 p.m., but Jasmine discovered that the side entrance near the faculty offices sometimes didn't latch properly. She'd wait until the custodial staff, including her mother, had moved to other buildings, then slip inside. The practice rooms in the basement were soundproofed. No one would hear her. She could practice for hours late into the evening until her mother finished her shift and they could ride the bus home together. Her mother noticed, of course. Patricia Brooks wasn't oblivious. "Baby, you're exhausted," she said one night, watching Jasmine push food around her plate, too tired to eat. "You're at that school from 6 in the morning until 8 at night." "When are you sleeping? I'm fine, Mama," Jasmine said automatically. "You're not fine. You've got circles under your eyes. Your hands are shaking. What's going on?" Jasmine hesitated, then told her about the gala, about Mrs. Whitmore, about the Appassionata. Her mother listened in silence. When Jasmine finished, Patricia reached across the table and took her daughter's hands. "You don't have to do this," she said gently. "You don't have to prove anything to that woman." "Yes, I do," Jasmine said. "Because if I don't, she wins. She gets to believe that people like us don't belong in places like Oak Ridge, that we're not good enough, that we should know our place. And I can't accept that, Mama. Dad wouldn't have accepted that." At the mention of Michael, Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "Your father would have been so proud of you. But he'd also tell you that you don't have to break yourself to prove your worth to people who've already decided not to see it." Maybe Jasmine admitted. "But I promised him I'd never stop playing. And if I back down now, if I let Mrs. Whitmore scare me away, then I am stopping. I'm letting her silence me." Patricia squeezed her hands. "Then I'll help however I can. But you have to promise me you'll take care of yourself. Sleep. Eat. Don't destroy yourself for this." Jasmine promised, though they both knew it was a promise she'd struggle to keep. The weeks blurred together. Jasmine's entire life became the Appassionata. She'd wake up with passages running through her head. She'd practice fingerings on her desk during class, her fingers moving silently through complex runs. She'd fall asleep with the music still echoing in her mind. Slowly, painfully, she began to make progress. The first movement started to come together. Her fingers learned the patterns, the reaches, the furious energy required. She worked on sections over and over until her hands ached the opening chords, the rushing scales, the dramatic contrasts between fortissimo and pianissimo. But technique alone wasn't enough. The Appassionata required understanding. It required emotion. And it was her father who helped her find that even though he'd been gone for 5 years. Late one night, about 4 weeks into her preparation, Jasmine was struggling with the second movement. It was marked andante con moto, walking pace with motion, but it required something more than just the right tempo. It required tenderness, introspection, a sense of contemplative calm before the storm of the final movement. She kept playing the notes correctly, but something was missing. It felt mechanical, empty. Frustrated, she stopped and let her hands drop into her lap. And suddenly she was 12 years old again, sitting at the battered upright piano in their old apartment, her father beside her, his larger frame taking up most of the bench. They were playing a duet, a simple arrangement of amazing grace that he'd found in a second-hand music store. "Feel it," he'd said, his voice soft. "Don't just play the notes. Feel what they mean. This hymn is about being lost and being found, about being blind and then seeing, about grace, undeserved kindness. When you play it, let people feel that journey." She'd tried again, and somehow she'd understood. The notes had stayed the same, but the meaning had changed. The music had come alive. "That's it," her father had said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "That's music, Jasmine. Not just notes. Feeling, story, truth." Back in the practice room, Jasmine blinked away tears. She understood now. The second movement of the Appassionata wasn't just a technical exercise. It was a moment of peace in the middle of a storm. It was the eye of the hurricane. It was catching your breath before the chaos returned. She played it again, and this time she felt it. She let herself remember her father not just the good times, but the hard ones too. The nights he'd wake up screaming from nightmares. The days he'd sit silent, staring at nothing. The moments of pain and struggle. But also his gentleness, his patience, his love. His belief that beauty could exist even in the midst of suffering. The music flowed from her fingers differently now. Not just correct, but true. It was in those hours alone in the practice room playing for her father's memory that Jasmine truly began to learn the Appassionata. Not just as a collection of notes and techniques, but as a story. A story of struggle and passion and determination. A story not unlike her own. Her father had taught himself piano in a war zone, finding beauty in the midst of chaos. He'd come home broken and had healed himself through music. He'd passed that gift to his daughter, believing that she could do something with it that he never could. Every time she played now, she played for him. She played to honor his memory. She played to prove that his lessons hadn't died with him. She played because in a way it kept him alive. And slowly, impossibly, the Appassionata began to feel less like a mountain to climb, and more like a story she was learning to tell. But she wasn't doing it alone. About 6 weeks into her preparation, 2 of Jasmine's classmates approached her in the cafeteria. Olivia Martinez played cello in the school orchestra, a quiet girl with a warm smile who'd always been kind to Jasmine. Dylan Foster played drums in a garage band and took music theory because he actually loved it, not because it looked good on college applications. "We heard you're performing at the gala," Olivia said, sliding into the seat across from Jasmine. "Word travels fast," Jasmine said, not looking up from her half-eaten sandwich. "Whitmore's been talking about it," Dylan said, his expression dark. "She's telling everyone that you're doing the Appassionata. She's acting like it's some kind of joke." Jasmine's stomach tightened. She'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. "Some joke," Olivia said softly. "That piece is a beast." "Tell me about it," Jasmine muttered. "How's it going?" Dylan asked. Jasmine considered lying, then decided against it. "Honestly, I'm not sure I can do it. The first movement is coming together, but it's so physically demanding. And the third movement it's insane. I don't know if 3 months is enough time." Olivia and Dylan exchanged a glance. Then Olivia leaned forward. "What if you had more time to practice?" "I'm already practicing every second I can," Jasmine said. "We know," Dylan said. "We've seen you sneaking into the music building at night." Jasmine froze. "You relax," Olivia said. "We're not going to rat you out. Actually, we want to help. Dylan and I both have legit practice room reservations. An hour each Monday through Friday. You can use our slots." "I can't ask you to do that," Jasmine protested. "You're not asking." "We're offering," Dylan said. "Look, Whitmore's been pulling this elitist crap for years. Someone needs to call her on it. And watching you nail the Appassionata after she set you up to fail, that's going to be the most satisfying thing ever. Plus," Olivia added with a smile, "we believe in you. You're really good, Jasmine. Better than most people at this school realize." It was such a simple kindness, but it nearly broke Jasmine. She'd gotten so used to fighting alone that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone in her corner. "Thank you." She managed her voice thick. From that day on, Jasmine had an extra 2 hours of practice time each day. It made all the difference. The additional repetitions, the ability to work through difficult passages without rushing the stamina, building slowly, the impossible started to feel merely extremely difficult. But Mrs. Whitmore wasn't done with her sabotage. About 8 weeks before the gala, Jasmine arrived at her usual practice room to find the door locked and a note taped to it, "Practice rooms reserved for orchestra rehearsals through December 10th. See Mrs. Whitmore with scheduling conflicts." December 10th was 5 days before the gala. Jasmine stood there staring at the note, feeling panic rise in her throat. This was deliberate. This was Mrs. Whitmore cutting off her access at the most crucial time. She went to Mrs. Whitmore's office. "Ah, Miss Brooks," Mrs. Whitmore said when Jasmine appeared in her doorway. "I assume you saw the notice about the practice rooms." "The orchestra doesn't rehearse in the practice rooms," Jasmine said, trying to keep her voice level. "They rehearse in the auditorium." "Normally, yes. But we're preparing for our winter concert as well as the gala. We need the extra space. I'm sure you understand." Mrs. Whitmore's expression was perfectly pleasant and completely unyielding. "Mrs. Whitmore, the gala is in 8 weeks. I need to practice." "Of course you do. There are practice rooms in the public library downtown. I believe they're available for reservation." The downtown library was an hour away by bus. Each way, Jasmine would lose 2 hours of practice time just traveling. "This isn't fair," Jasmine said, her voice shaking. "Fair," Mrs. Whitmore looked up from her papers. "Miss Brooks, I gave you an opportunity that frankly you haven't earned. I'm not obligated to provide you with special accommodations. If you find the preparation too challenging, you're welcome to withdraw from the program. No one would think less of you for recognizing your limitations." That's exactly what you want, Jasmine thought. "You want me to quit." "I'm not withdrawing," she said. "Then I suggest you find alternative practice arrangements. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Jasmine left the office with rage and desperation warring in her chest. She was being sabotaged deliberately and systematically, and there was nothing she could do about it, except refuse to quit. That night, she told Olivia and Dylan what had happened. "That's such garbage," Dylan said, his jaw tight. "She can't do that." "She just did," Jasmine said miserably. "Okay," Olivia said, thinking. "So we need to get creative. My parents are out of town next week visiting my grandmother. You can practice at my house. We have a decent upright piano, and my church has a piano in the basement," Dylan added. "I can get you a key. It's not great, but it's something. And there's the piano in the senior commons," Olivia continued. "No one uses it. You can practice there during lunch and free periods." They were problem-solving, finding solutions, refusing to let Mrs. Whitmore win, and Jasmine felt something warm spreading through her chest. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. Dylan shrugged. "Because it's the right thing to do." "Because Whitmore deserves to be proven wrong," Olivia said. "And because you're our friend." Friend. The word settled over Jasmine like a blanket. She hadn't realized how lonely she'd been until that moment. The next 6 weeks were a blur of borrowed pianos and stolen practice time. Jasmine played on Olivia's family's upright, which was out of tune but serviceable. She played in Dylan's church basement on an old spinet that had 2 sticky keys. She played in the senior commons between classes, ignoring the curious stares and occasional snickers from her classmates. And slowly, miraculously, the Appassionata began to feel like it was truly hers. 4 weeks before the gala, something shifted. Jasmine was running through the third movement, the presto section that felt like a sprint through fire, when she realized she'd played through the entire passage without stumbling. Her fingers had found the patterns. Her muscles had memorized the movements. The notes were flowing. She stopped staring at her hands in disbelief, then immediately played the section again. And again. Each time it came out cleaner, faster, more confident. "It's clicking," she whispered to herself in the empty church basement. But just as her confidence was building, her body started to rebel. The physical demands of the Appassionata were brutal. The piece required power, speed, endurance, and control all at once. Jasmine's hands started to ache, a deep, persistent pain in her tendons and joints. Her shoulders seized up from the tension. She developed tension headaches that lasted for hours. Her mother noticed, of course, and tried to make her rest. But Jasmine couldn't rest. She had 4 weeks, 28 days, and she still wasn't where she needed to be. One afternoon, practicing in the senior commons, Jasmine hit a wrong note, and something inside her snapped. She slammed her hands down on the keys in frustration, the discordant crash echoing through the room. "That's not going to help." Jasmine spun around. An elderly black man stood in the doorway, leaning on a cane. He was well-dressed, a pressed shirt, cardigan, sweater, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She'd never seen him before. "I'm sorry," Jasmine said quickly. "I didn't mean to express frustration." The man smiled. "Young lady, if you can't get frustrated while learning the Appassionata, you're not doing it right." He walked into the room slowly, his cane tapping against the floor. "May I?" Jasmine slid over on the bench, and the man sat beside her with a small sigh of relief. "Harold Davies," he said, extending his hand. "Jasmine Brooks," she replied, shaking it. "I know," he said. "I'm a friend of your mother's. We met in the cafeteria a few weeks ago. She mentioned you were preparing for something special." "You're a pianist?" Jasmine asked. "Was. Am. Will always be, I suppose." Harold placed his hands on the keys with obvious affection. "Arthritis won't let me play much anymore, but muscle memory is a persistent thing." He played a few bars of a Chopin prelude, his fingers moving stiffly but accurately. Then he stopped and looked at Jasmine. "Your mother told me you were taking on the Appassionata for the winter gala. That's ambitious." "Some would say foolish," Jasmine said bitterly. "Only fools say that," Harold replied. "Show me what you've got." Over the next hour, Harold listened to Jasmine play through the piece. He stopped her occasionally, offering suggestions. Small adjustments in fingering that would make difficult passages easier. Tips for maintaining stamina. Ways to think about the structure that made the whole thing feel less overwhelming. "You've got the technique," he said when she finished. "That's clear. What you need now is confidence, and maybe some context." He told her about his own history, how he'd grown up in the South in the 1950s and 60s, when a black boy playing classical piano was seen as pretentious at best and threatening at worst. How he'd fought to get into conservatory only to face professors who doubted his abilities. How he'd performed in venues where he had to enter through the back door, where he couldn't use the same facilities as white performers. "I played the Appassionata for my graduate recital," he said. 1968. "My professors didn't think I could handle it. They suggested I pick something easier, more appropriate to my background." Whatever that meant. "What did you do?" Jasmine asked. "I played it anyway. Performed it perfectly. Proved them wrong." He smiled at the memory. "Beethoven doesn't care what color you are, Miss Brooks. He only cares if you can channel the fury and passion he put into those notes. And from what I've heard today, you can." "I'm not sure I believe that," Jasmine admitted. "Then that's what we need to work on," Harold said firmly. "Because technique without belief is just noise. You need to trust that you belong on that stage, that you've earned your place there. Even though Mrs. Whitmore only gave me this opportunity to watch me fail." Harold's expression hardened. "Especially because of that. There will always be people who doubt you, who want to see you fail, who believe you don't belong. The question is whether you'll let them define you, or whether you'll define yourself. He stood slowly, leaning on his cane. I'll be in the audience at the gala, Miss Brooks, and I expect to see you prove that music belongs to anyone brave enough to claim it. After he left, Jasmine sat at the piano for a long time, thinking about his words. Harold had faced discrimination far worse than anything she'd experienced. He'd performed in an era when simply being a black classical musician was an act of defiance, and he'd succeeded. He'd proven them wrong. Could she do the same? Over the next weeks, Harold became an unexpected mentor. He'd show up at the senior commons during lunch, or at Dylan's church, offering guidance and encouragement. He taught Jasmine not just how to play the notes, but how to think about the music, how to pace herself for the long performance, how to recover from mistakes, how to maintain focus under pressure. The technical stuff you've got, he'd tell her. Now you need to work on the mental game. Because when you walk out on that stage, 600 people are going to be watching you. Some of them will be hoping you succeed. Some will be expecting you to fail. And you need to be able to block all of that out and just play. They practiced visualization exercises. Jasmine would close her eyes and imagine herself on the stage playing, confidently owning the moment. At first, the images filled her with anxiety, but gradually they became empowering. She was also dealing with increasing hostility from Mrs. Whitmore. 3 weeks before the gala, Mrs. Whitmore stopped Jasmine in the hallway. Miss Brooks, I hope you're preparing appropriately. I'd hate for you to embarrass yourself and the school with an inadequate performance. I'm preparing just fine, Mrs. Whitmore. Are you? Because I've been hearing concerning reports. You've been monopolizing practice spaces, disrupting other students, missing class assignments to practice. None of that was true. Jasmine had been careful not to interfere with anyone else's schedule, and her grades were actually improving. She'd been so focused on the Appassionata that she'd been using study time more efficiently. I haven't missed any assignments, Jasmine said. Well, see that you don't, and please remember that the gala represents Oak Ridge Academy. We have a reputation to maintain. If at any point you feel you're not ready, it would be better to withdraw than to deliver a subpar performance. Jasmine met her eyes. I'll be ready. Mrs. Whitmore's smile was thin. We'll see. The woman was also spreading doubt among the student body. Madison Clark approached Jasmine in the library one day, looking uncomfortable. Look, I don't want to be a jerk, she said quietly, but people are saying you're going to crash and burn at the gala. Whitmore's been talking to parents, saying you're in over your head. She's managing expectations, I guess. Let me guess, Jasmine said. She's saying I'm not ready. More like she's saying the performance might not meet Oak Ridge's usual standards, and everyone knows she's talking about you. Madison hesitated. For what it's worth, I think it's messed up. You shouldn't have to deal with this. But I do, Jasmine said. 2 weeks before the gala, Jasmine had a breakthrough. She was practicing the entire piece straight through for the first time, running it from beginning to end without stopping. It was exhausting. The Appassionata was nearly 30 minutes of continuous, intense playing. Her hands ached, her shoulders burned. But she kept going, pushing through the physical discomfort, maintaining focus. When she finally played the last thunderous chords of the third movement, she sat back, breathing hard, her heart pounding. She'd done it, start to finish. No major mistakes. Not perfect, but solid. Harold, who'd been listening from a chair in the corner, started clapping slowly. That he set his eyes bright was the sound of someone ready for battle. Jasmine felt tears prick her eyes. You really think so? I know so. He stood and walked over to the piano. Now you need to do it again, and again. until you can play it in your sleep, until it's so deep in your bones that nerves can't shake it loose. For the next 2 weeks, that's exactly what Jasmine did. She played the Appassionata every day, multiple times. Sometimes just sections, sometimes the whole thing. She played it when she was tired, when she was hungry, when her hands hurt. She played it until the notes became second nature, until the emotional journey felt as familiar as breathing. She also started performing it for people. Small audiences at first, Olivia and Dylan in the church basement. Then her mother, who cried. Then Harold and a few of his friends, other retired musicians, who'd gathered to support her. "You need to get comfortable being watched," Harold explained. "The gala won't be the first time you perform this in front of people. That way, when the moment comes, it's just another performance. A bigger stage, sure, but the same piece, the same you." 1 week before the gala, the school held a mandatory rehearsal for all performers. Jasmine was scheduled to run through her piece on the stage where the gala would be held, a large theater rented for the event, with professional lighting and acoustics. She'd never played on a stage that grand before. The piano was a magnificent 9-foot Steinway concert grand, perfectly maintained, with a tone that was both powerful and delicate. When Jasmine sat at the bench for the first time, she felt like she was sitting at the throne of kings. Mrs. Whitmore was in the audience, clipboard in hand, along with the event coordinator and lighting technician. Other student performers were scattered throughout the theater, waiting their turns. "Whenever you're ready, Miss Brooks," Mrs. Whitmore called out, her voice echoing in the space. Jasmine placed her hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and began. The opening chords of the Appassionata rang out bold and commanding. The acoustics of the theater were perfect, every note crystal clear, every dynamic shift audible. Jasmine let the music sweep her away, let her weeks of preparation flow through her fingers. She didn't play the whole piece, just the first movement as requested. But those 10 minutes were transformative. The piano responded to her touch like a living thing. The space amplified the drama of the music. And for the first time, Jasmine truly understood what it would be like to perform this on the actual night. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then spontaneous applause broke out from the other students who'd been watching. Even Christopher Yang, who rarely praised anyone, was nodding with appreciation. Mrs. Whitmore, however, looked like she'd just bitten into something sour. "That will be adequate," she said, making notes on her clipboard. "Please be sure to pace yourself during the actual performance. We wouldn't want you to tire out halfway through." But Jasmine saw the truth in the woman's eyes. Mrs. Whitmore was worried. For the first time, she was genuinely concerned that Jasmine might actually pull this off. That night, Jasmine called Harold from home. "I think I can do this," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of excitement and terror. "I actually think I can pull it off." "Of course you can," Harold said. The question was never whether you could. The question was whether you believed you could. And now Jasmine asked, "Now Harold said you show them what you're made of." The final week passed in a strange blur. Jasmine felt oddly calm. She'd done the work. She'd put in the hours. The piece was in her fingers, in her muscles, in her soul. There was nothing left to do but wait. Mrs. Whitmore made one final attempt at sabotage the day before the gala. She called Jasmine into her office and informed her that she'd be performing last after all the other student performers, right before the professional guest musician who was headlining the event. "It's the most prominent slot," Mrs. Whitmore said, with false sweetness. "I thought you'd appreciate the honor." Jasmine understood perfectly. The last performer faced an audience that had already been sitting for over an hour. An audience that was tired, restless, ready for the event to end. An audience least likely to be patient with a lengthy, demanding piece. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore," Jasmine said evenly. "I appreciate the opportunity. If her composure irritated the music teacher, she didn't show it. "Do try to make us proud, Miss Brooks. The Oak Ridge name is on the line." That night, Jasmine couldn't sleep. She lay in bed running through the Appassionata, in her mind, her fingers twitching through the passages. Her mother came in around midnight and sat on the edge of her bed. "Your father would be so proud," Patricia said softly, brushing hair back from Jasmine's forehead. "Not because of tomorrow, but because of who you are, the strength you've shown, the way you've refused to give up." "I'm scared," Mama Jasmine admitted. "Good," her mother said. "Fear means it matters, and things that matter are always worth being scared about. What if I fail? What if Mrs. Whitmore's right, and I'm not good enough?" Patricia took her daughter's hands. "Then you fail. But you'll have failed trying, failed fighting, failed refusing to accept someone else's judgment about what you deserve. That's not really failure, baby. That's courage." The morning of December 15th arrived cold and clear. Jasmine woke early, her stomach churning with nerves. She practiced one final time at home scales and arpeggios to warm up her hands, running through the most challenging passages, then finally playing through the entire piece one last time. When she finished, she looked at the ceiling and whispered, "This is for you, Dad." The gala was scheduled to begin at 7 p.m. Jasmine and her mother arrived at the theater at 5:30 for the performers' call time. The building was already buzzing with activity caterers, setting up refreshments, donors arriving early to socialize students in formal wear, running through last-minute preparations. Jasmine wore a simple navy dress that her mother had altered to fit her perfectly. It wasn't designer, it wasn't expensive, but it was clean and dignified, and her mother had stayed up late, making sure every seam was perfect. Backstage, Jasmine found a quiet corner and tried to center herself. Other performers were warming up. She could hear Madison running through violin scales, Christopher doing technical exercises at another piano. The energy was a mix of excitement and nerves. Harold found her backstage at 6:30. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Jasmine admitted. "Good," he smiled. "That means your body is ready to perform. All that adrenaline, all those nerves, channel them into the music. Let them fuel your performance instead of undermining it. What if I mess up? Then you keep playing. Beethoven himself said to play a wrong note is insignificant. To play without passion is inexcusable. You have passion, Jasmine. Trust it." He handed her something, a small photograph. Jasmine looked down and saw her father in his military uniform, young and smiling, standing in front of that battered upright piano in their old apartment. "Your mother gave this to me," Harold said. "She thought you might want it with you tonight." Jasmine clutched the photo, tears threatening. "Thank you. Now go show them," Harold said. "Show them that music belongs to anyone with the courage to claim it." At 7 p.m., the gala began. The theater was magnificent, all red velvet seats and golden fixtures, chandeliers casting warm light over the crowd. 600 people filled the space, most of them dripping with wealth. Diamond jewelry caught the light. Designer gowns rustled as people found their seats. This was Connecticut's elite gathered to support Oak Ridge Preparatory Academy, and perhaps more importantly, to be seen supporting it. Jasmine watched from the wings as the evening unfolded. The headmaster gave opening remarks thanking donors and praising the school's musical program. Mrs. Whitmore was introduced to polite applause, smiling graciously as if she hadn't spent the past 3 months trying to sabotage one of her own students. Then the performances began. Madison Clark played Vivaldi beautifully. Her violin work was precise and emotional. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Next came a string quartet performing Mozart, followed by Sofia Castellano's Brahms, which was technically impressive, if a bit mechanical. Christopher Yang's Chopin was arguably the best so far, earning him a standing ovation from several rows. Performance after performance, the evening progressed. The audience was engaged at first, but Jasmine could see attention beginning to waver as the program stretched on. People checked their phones. Whispered conversations started. Some shifted restlessly in their seats. By the time they reached the final student performance, Jasmine's slot, it had been nearly 90 minutes of music. The audience was tired. Some people had already started gathering their coats and bags, clearly preparing to leave once the students finished and before the professional headliner performed. This was exactly what Mrs. Whitmore had planned. Put Jasmine last, when the audience was least receptive, most impatient, most likely to be critical of any imperfection. Backstage, Jasmine could feel her heart hammering. Her hands were cold despite the warmth of the theater. Her mouth was dry. Every instinct screamed at her to run to fake illness, to do anything but walk out onto that stage, Ainsu. She looked down at the photograph of her father that she'd tucked into her dress pocket. Closed her eyes. Breathed. She heard Harold's voice in her mind. Trust your preparation. Trust yourself. She heard her father's voice. Music doesn't care about your bank account. It only cares if you can feel it here and share it with the world. She heard her own voice, the promise she'd made. I'll never stop playing. The stage manager touched her shoulder. You're up in 2 minutes, Miss Brooks. Jasmine nodded, stood, and walked toward the stage entrance. From her vantage point in the wings, she could see Mrs. Whitmore sitting in the 3rd row, her expression carefully neutral. But Jasmine caught the small, satisfied smile playing at the corner of the woman's mouth. She thought she'd won. She thought Jasmine would crumble under the pressure, under the weight of an exhausted audience's expectations, under the sheer impossibility of what she was attempting. The announcer, the school's headmaster, stepped to the microphone. And now for our final student performance of the evening, we have Senior Jasmine Brooks performing Beethoven's Piano Sonata, number 23, in F minor. Opus 57, commonly known as the Appassionata Sonata. There was polite applause, but Jasmine also heard the whispers. She'd been hearing variations of them all night. That's the janitor's daughter. Isn't that piece way too advanced? How long is this going to take? The Appassionata, that's ambitious. She walked onto the stage, and the whispers grew slightly louder before people remembered their manners and fell into an expectant silence. The spotlight was bright and hot. She could see the front rows clearly, Mrs. Whitmore's face carefully composed, her mother standing in the back, hands clasped together as if in prayer. Harold sitting several rows back, giving her a small, encouraging nod. And 600 other faces ranging from curious to skeptical to openly dismissive. Jasmine walked to the magnificent Steinway Grand at center stage. She adjusted the bench, sat down, and placed her hands in her lap. She took one deep breath, then another. In her mind, she heard her father. Close your eyes, feel the music, let it flow. She closed her eyes for just a moment. Let herself remember not just the practicing, not just the technique, but what the music meant, the passion, the fury, the determination, the refusal to be silenced. When she opened her eyes, something had changed in her. The nerves were still there, but they'd transformed into energy, into readiness, into purpose. She raised her hands over the keys. The theater held its breath. Mrs. Whitmore leaned forward slightly, her small smile still in place, waiting for the disaster she'd orchestrated. And Jasmine began to play. The opening chords of the Appassionata struck like lightning. They weren't timid or hesitant. They were bold, powerful, commanding, announcing to everyone in the theater that something extraordinary was about to happen. Jasmine's hands came down on the keys with absolute authority, and the first explosive phrase rang out through the space. The effect was immediate. Heads that had been turning away snapped back to attention. Whispered conversations died mid-sentence. People who'd been gathering their coats froze, because what they were hearing didn't match what they'd expected. The opening of the first movement is marked allegro assai, very fast, and requires tremendous energy right from the start. Jasmine attacked it with precision and passion, her fingers flying across the keys. The main theme, dark, urgent, restless, emerged with crystal clarity. The notes came in cascading waves, building and receding, creating a sense of unstoppable momentum. Mrs. Whitmore's smile vanished. In the back of the theater, Patricia Brooks had tears streaming down her face. Harold sat forward in his seat, a fierce pride blazing in his eyes. And Jasmine kept playing. The first movement of the Appassionata is approximately 10 minutes of relentless technical and emotional demands. It requires the pianist to navigate rapid scales, octave passages, complex rhythms, and dramatic dynamic contrasts, all while maintaining the underlying narrative of the music. Beethoven had poured his fury and passion into this movement, creating something that was equal parts tempest and poetry. Jasmine had spent 3 months learning not just how to play the notes, but how to inhabit the music. And now on this stage, with her father's photograph in her pocket, and Harold's words in her mind, and her mother's love supporting her, she finally let herself become the music. Her hands moved with impossible speed through passages that would challenge professional pianists. The difficult stretches that required her hands to span nearly 2 octaves, she executed them smoothly. The rapid alternations between fortissimo and pianissimo, between thunder and whisper, she controlled them perfectly. The syncopated rhythms that could trip up even experienced performers, she navigated them with confidence. But it wasn't just the technical mastery that captivated the audience. It was the emotion. Every phrase told a story. Every dynamic shift conveyed feeling. When the music raged, you could feel anger and defiance. When it softened, you could sense vulnerability and pain. When it built to its dramatic high points, you could feel triumph and determination. About 4 minutes into the first movement, something remarkable happened. The audience stopped being a collection of wealthy donors and skeptical socialites. They became witnesses to something profound. Several people who'd been checking their phones put them away. A man who'd been preparing to leave sat back down. Women in diamond necklaces leaned forward in their seats. They were hooked. The development section of the first movement is where Beethoven took his themes and twisted them, explored them, pushed them to their limits. Jasmine's fingers danced through the intricate passages, maintaining perfect clarity even at breakneck speeds. Her left hand provided thunderous bass notes, while her right hand sang out the melody. Then they'd switch her hands, crossing over each other in complex coordinations that looked almost impossible. By the time she reached the recapitulation, the return of the main theme, people in the audience were holding their breath. The intensity had built to almost unbearable levels. And then Jasmine brought it home with the coda, the furious ending of the first movement, where Beethoven seemed to be saying, "And here's everything I just told you, but more." The final phrase of the first movement ended with decisive force. And without pausing, because the Appassionata's movements flow into each other, Jasmine immediately began the second movement. The contrast was shocking. After the fury and passion of the first movement, the second movement, marked andante con moto, was a moment of stillness. Not quite peace, there was too much tension underlying the music for that, but a pause. A breath in the middle of the storm. This was the movement Jasmine had struggled with until she'd remembered her father's lesson about feeling the music. Now she played it with her whole heart. The opening theme, simple and profound, emerged from the piano like a quiet conversation. The accompaniment was gentle, almost hymn-like. People in the audience who'd been swept up in the intensity of the first movement found themselves suddenly moved in a different way. This wasn't about technical brilliance or virtuosic display. This was about soul. Jasmine's eyes closed as she played. Tears began to slip down her cheeks. She was playing for her father now, remembering quiet afternoons at their battered upright, his gentle corrections, his patient encouragement, his belief that music was about more than notes on a page. In the audience, there wasn't a dry eye in the first 10 rows. Mrs. Whitmore sat frozen, her face pale, unable to deny what she was hearing. The second movement built gradually, adding layers of complexity while maintaining its contemplative character. The harmonies became richer, the rhythms more intricate. And then, in a passage that requires supreme control, Jasmine played so softly that the audience had to strain to hear, creating a moment of such intimacy that it felt like she was sharing a secret. The movement ended with a sense of unresolved tension. Something more was coming. And without pause, Jasmine launched into the third movement. The finale, Allegro ma non troppo. Presto is where Beethoven unleashed everything he'd been holding back. It's marked fast, but not too fast, though it feels like a tornado, regardless. From the opening explosive phrase, it drives forward with relentless energy. This was the movement Jasmine had feared most during her preparation. It's nearly 10 minutes of sustained virtuosity. The technical demands are extreme rapid double notes, flying passages that cover the entire keyboard, moments where both hands play intricate patterns simultaneously. It requires not just skill, but physical stamina. Many pianists struggle to maintain the intensity through to the end. But Jasmine didn't struggle. She soared. Her hands flew across the keyboard with a precision and power that left the audience stunned. The difficult passages that Mrs. Whitmore had assumed would trip her up, Jasmine executed them flawlessly. The moments that required impossible coordination, she made them look easy. The sections that should have exhausted her, she played them with energy to spare. Because she'd done the work. She'd put in the hours. She'd practiced until her hands ached and her mind was exhausted. She'd faced every obstacle Mrs. Whitmore had thrown at her and found ways around them. And now all of that preparation was flowing through her fingers. The music built and built, phrase after phrase, climbing higher, pushing harder, demanding more. Jasmine gave it everything she had. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her entire body moved with the music, her shoulders, her arms, her back, her feet on the pedals. She wasn't just playing the piano. She was dancing with it, fighting with it, loving it. The audience was completely transfixed. Some people had tears streaming down their faces. Others sat with their mouths slightly open, unable to believe what they were witnessing. In the back, Patricia Brooks had her hands over her heart, her lips moving in what might have been prayer or simply wonder. Harold was standing now, unable to stay seated, his cane gripped tightly in one hand. The finale of the Appassionata builds to one of the most thrilling climaxes in all of piano literature. Beethoven took his themes and pushed them to their absolute limit, creating passages of such intensity that they feel like the piano itself might explode from the force. Jasmine gave it everything she had. The rapid, repeated notes perfectly even. The octave passages that required tremendous strength, powerful and clear. The final ascending runs that lead to the ultimate climax, breathtaking in their speed and accuracy. And then came the final phrase. A series of thunderous chords, each one slamming down with absolute finality. Each one saying, "This is who I am. This is what I can do. You cannot silence me." The last chord rang out through the theater, sustained by the pedal filling every corner of the space with its resonance, and then silence. For 2, 3, 4 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Jasmine sat at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, her chest heaving, her face streaked with tears and sweat. She'd done it. She'd played the Appassionata, all 30 minutes of it, and she'd played it well. The silence stretched, and then the theater erupted. The applause started as a few scattered claps, then swelled like a wave until it filled the entire theater with sound. Within seconds, people were on their feet. Not just a few people, not just the front rows. Everyone. 600 people standing, applauding, cheering, some shouting, some crying. A standing ovation. Complete. Unanimous. Thunderous. In the back, Patricia Brooks was sobbing, her hands clasped to her mouth. Around her, people were congratulating her, telling her how proud she must be, what an incredible daughter she had. Harold was applauding so hard, his hands hurt, tears streaming down his face, thinking about his own performance of the Appassionata 50 years ago, and how proud he was to see this young woman carry that tradition forward. Olivia and Dylan, sitting together in the student section, were hugging each other and screaming their support, and Mrs. Constance Whitmore sat completely still, her face drained of color, staring at Jasmine as if she were seeing a ghost. The applause went on and on. 5 minutes. People wouldn't stop clapping. Some shouted "Brava," others whistled. The professional pianist who was supposed to headline the evening, a renowned performer who'd played in concert halls around the world, was in the front row, applauding as enthusiastically as anyone. Jasmine stood slowly, still, dazed, unable to quite process what was happening. She bowed, and the applause somehow got louder. She bowed again, her legs shaking so badly she almost fell. Someone rushed onto the stage, the headmaster, his face flushed with excitement. He took Jasmine's hand and raised it high, and the audience roared their approval. When the applause finally slowly began to die down, people started approaching Jasmine. The famous pianist was first taking both of Jasmine's hands. "That was extraordinary," she said, her eyes bright with genuine admiration. "Truly extraordinary. Have you thought about conservatory, Julie?" "Curtis, because with that level of artistry, you belong there." Other musicians crowded around, all echoing the same sentiments. Professional performers, teachers from other schools, even some of the wealthy donors who'd initially been skeptical. "I've heard the Appassionata performed in concert halls around the world," one elderly gentleman said, "and I've never heard it played with more passion than what you just gave us." The Oak Ridge students who'd performed earlier were crowding around too. Christopher Yang shook his head in disbelief. "I've been playing piano for 14 years with the best teachers money can buy, and I couldn't touch what you just did. That was insane." "That was beautiful," Madison corrected, then hugged Jasmine impulsively. "Just beautiful." In the chaos of congratulations, Jasmine caught sight of Mrs. Whitmore attempting to slip away toward the exit, but donors were intercepting her, and their comments weren't kind. "Constance, you've been hiding this remarkable talent from us. Why haven't we heard her perform before? She should have been featured prominently in the program." Mrs. Whitmore's attempts to deflect were transparent and unsuccessful. "Well, she's a scholarship student, you understand, and there are limited opportunities. Limited opportunities." An older woman who served on the school's board fixed Mrs. Whitmore with a sharp look. "That young woman has more talent than any student I've heard at Oak Ridge in 20 years. If she hasn't been given opportunities, that's a failure of leadership." The criticism was piling up, and Mrs. Whitmore's carefully maintained composure was beginning to crack. She made excuses and retreated, her face flushed with embarrassment, and something that might have been shame or might have just been anger at being proven so spectacularly wrong. Patricia finally reached her daughter, pushing through the crowd. Mother and daughter embraced, both crying. "Baby, that was." "I don't have words," Patricia said. "Your father was there. I know he was. He was so proud. I felt him," Mama Jasmine whispered. "While I was playing, I felt him right there with me." Harold made his way to Jasmine next. "You did it," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "You did exactly what I knew you could do. You showed them." "I couldn't have done it without you," Jasmine said. "No," Harold corrected gently. "I just reminded you of what was already inside you. That performance that came from you, your talent, your dedication, your refusal to give up. Be proud of that." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The professional pianist still performed, but people kept approaching Jasmine during intermission. She received 3 business cards from representatives of music conservatories. A wealthy donor offered to fund her college education completely, wherever she wanted to go. A concert hall director invited her to perform in their Emerging Artists series. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. The next morning, Jasmine woke up to find that her performance had gone viral. Someone had recorded it on their phone, and within hours the video had spread across social media. By noon, it had over 1 million views. Music blogs were writing about the high school student who stunned a wealthy audience with her Appassionata. Classical music forums were debating her interpretation and technique. Messages poured in from around the world. By Monday, when Jasmine returned to Oak Ridge, everything had changed. Students who'd previously ignored her stopped her in the hallways to congratulate her. Teachers smiled warmly. Even the school's administration, which had been largely indifferent to scholarship students, suddenly wanted to feature her in promotional materials. But the most significant change involved Mrs. Whitmore. On Tuesday morning, Jasmine was called to the headmaster's office. She arrived to find several board members present, along with the headmaster, and notably not Mrs. Whitmore. "Miss Brooks," the headmaster began, "we want to first apologize. It's come to our attention that you faced certain obstacles in preparing for your gala performance, obstacles that should never have existed." One of the board members, the woman who'd confronted Mrs. Whitmore at the gala, spoke up. "Several students have come forward to describe a pattern of discriminatory behavior from Mrs. Whitmore. Limiting access to practice facilities, making disparaging comments about students' backgrounds, creating an unwelcoming environment for scholarship students and students of color. We're conducting a full investigation," another board member added. "Mrs. Whitmore has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome." Within 2 weeks, the investigation concluded. The findings were damning years of subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination, of favoring wealthy students, of making Oak Ridge's music program less accessible to talented students who didn't fit Mrs. Whitmore's narrow definition of who belonged in classical music. Mrs. Constance Whitmore was asked to resign. When she refused, she was terminated. A new music director was hired, a younger woman who'd come from a public school background and had dedicated her career to making classical music accessible to everyone. One of her first acts was to establish additional scholarship funds for music students and to open up practice facilities to all students regardless of background. Jasmine received acceptance letters from every conservatory she applied to. Jules Souliard offered her a full scholarship. Curtis did the same. The New England Conservatory sent a personal letter from their president. She chose Juilliard. But before she left Oak Ridge, Jasmine did one more thing. She took some of the money from the fundraiser that had been established in her honor. The community had raised over $50,000 to support her education and created the Michael Brooks Memorial Scholarship. It would provide funding for underprivileged students who wanted to study music but lacked the resources. "Music doesn't care about your bank account," she said at the scholarship announcement ceremony, echoing her father's words. It only cares if you can feel it here. She placed her hand over her heart, and share it with the world. This scholarship is for anyone who has that music inside them, but needs help letting it out. That summer before heading to Juilliard, Jasmine returned to Oak Ridge one final time. They'd invited her to perform at graduation as a guest artist. This time, she chose her father's favorite piece, the Chopin Nocturne she'd originally wanted to play at the gala. She performed it for him, for her mother, for Harold, for everyone who'd supported her. And this time, there was no Mrs. Whitmore in the audience trying to tear her down. There was only music, pure and free. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in late August before leaving for Juilliard, Jasmine drove to the cemetery where her father was buried. She hadn't been there in months. Visits were too painful. The grief still too fresh, even 5 years later. She brought a portable keyboard with her, one of the gifts she'd received from a donor after the gala. Setting it up beside her father's headstone, she sat on the grass in the summer sunshine and played. She played the Chopin Nocturne. She played some of the Appassionata, the gentle second movement that had reminded her so strongly of him. She played hymns and folk songs, pieces they'd learned together when she was small. And as she played, she talked to him. "I did it, Dad," she said softly, her fingers moving over the keys. "I kept my promise. I never stopped playing. And I hope I made you proud." The wind rustled through the trees overhead, and for just a moment, Jasmine could have sworn she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder, the way her father used to rest his hand there when she played as a child. "Music doesn't care about bank accounts," she whispered, repeating his words one more time. "It only cares if you can feel it and share it." "I understand now what you meant. It's not about the audience or the venue or the opportunities. It's about this." She pressed her hand to her heart. "It's about refusing to let anyone silence what's inside you." She played one final piece, Amazing Grace, the duet they'd played together so many times. Even playing alone, she could hear his part in her mind, could feel him beside her on the bench, could sense his pride and love. When she finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then she stood, packed up the keyboard, and walked back to her mother's car with her head held high. In a few weeks, she'd be at Juilliard studying with the finest teachers in the world. She'd be playing on the greatest stages, performing for audiences who understood and appreciated her art. She'd be building a career doing what she loved most in the world. But she'd never forget the 3 months she'd spent fighting for the right to play the Appassionata. She'd never forget Mrs. Whitmore's attempts to break her, or Harold's encouragement, or her mother's unwavering support. She'd never forget what it felt like to be underestimated, dismissed, told she didn't belong. And she'd never forget the sound of 600 people rising to their feet, applauding not just her performance, but the truth that she'd proven that talent has nothing to do with privilege, that passion can overcome prejudice, and that music truly does belong to anyone brave enough to claim it. Years from now, when Jasmine Brooks became one of the most celebrated pianists of her generation, when she performed in Carnegie Hall and the Royal Albert Hall and concert venues around the world, she would always remember that night at Oak Ridge Preparatory Academy. The night when a 17-year-old girl in a simple navy dress sat down at a piano and refused to be silenced. The night when she proved that true talent cannot be contained by prejudice, cannot be limited by circumstances, and cannot be defined by anyone's narrow expectations. The night when she played the Appassionata and changed everything. Because sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places. And those who try to silence it only make it echo louder. Sometimes all it takes is one person with the courage to sit down at the piano and play, and the whole world will listen.